Welcome to the next episode of the Caroline Gleich Show. I'm Caroline Gleich, professional ski mountaineer, endurance athlete, environmental advocate, and former candidate for U.S. Senate. And I'm excited today to talk with Si-Hua, who is a worker at the REI in Durham, North Carolina. He's worked there for 3 years, and since the Durham location's workers unionized in 2023, he's been involved in union contract negotiations for that store, as well as the broader national campaign across unionized REI stores. And my journey in the outdoor recreation industry actually started at REI. I was a proud green vest, starting as a cashier and a greeter, moving into action sports specialist. I was so super excited to work on the floor and selling skis and hard goods. And I even learned how to rock climb at the REI climbing gym at the 3300 South Salt Lake City store location. And in 2017, REI supported my film Follow Through, which is a documentary where I became the first woman to climb and ski all the lines in the Shooting Gallery, which is a steep skiing guidebook to the Wasatch Mountains. And this was a huge milestone for me that launched my career. It helped me amplify my story to a national audience. And they put a lot of money and advertising behind it. And so I'll be always grateful for that. But that's part of the reason I care so much about this, is because I love REI and I really want the co-op to live up to its values. People and planet first. And so I know how powerful REI can be when it walks the walk. So Si-Hua, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me on, Caroline. It's really nice to be here.
I really appreciate it. So you've been at the Durham location for 3 years. And wait, what department do you work in?
That's right. I started in the summer of 22. I started in back of house, working stocking and then fulfilling shipping orders. And then I worked in like footwear and clothing. Then I moved to camp and action sports, and then finally the register. So now I mostly work in camp and action sports, but I move around. I'm one of the kind of wild cards that they get to put wherever they're missing someone. So I get to work most places in the store, which I feel very fortunate about. I like the variety a lot.
Yeah, I think I would like that too. Although it was a lot of specialized training, I felt like, for me to master action sports, especially with like the different rack systems and all of that stuff. So it would be also challenging at times, I think, to be familiar with so much inventory. And what are your favorite things to do outside?
I like to hike a lot. I'm a very casual cyclist and camper, not very hardcore. I have colleagues who are much more like intense about those things. I'm more of a casual outdoor person, but I very much enjoy my hiking.
Yeah, that's great. I think just any time outside, like I dress like a runner, but I like to power hike, you know? I like the convenience of running clothes and the comfort of running shoes, but a lot of times I like to just go nice and slow and take in the birds and all the noises. So I can definitely relate to that. Just any time outside for me is like magical and transformative.
Absolutely.
So in terms of unionizing, maybe you can just give us a brief overview. Like, what is a union?
So a union is where a group of employees in one employer, or maybe across many locations that a single employer has, they come together to advocate for themselves. And so unionization works on the principle that there's power in numbers. And so any single employee trying to advocate for themselves against an employer, it can sometimes feel intimidating. But when we come together to pool our resources and advocate for ourselves, we're a lot more powerful. And so a union is essentially just people getting together to work for the common good and to advocate for themselves.
What motivated you and others to organize and unionize at the REI Durham store?
So at REI, I think a key part of what makes the REI experience really special is REI staff. And we really care about the outdoors. We care about getting folks outdoors, helping folks from all kinds of backgrounds have better experiences outdoors. And we wanted working conditions that better fit our efforts, our hard work, our expertise. and working conditions which would enable us to do our job well, which would also help REI thrive and also help us help our customers better. And ultimately, the goal is a union contract would give us a say in shaping the policies that affect our daily lives. And we also wanted REI to be held accountable to their own values, as you've just as you've mentioned. REI started off as a co-op with the goal of getting people outdoors in a climate where there were no affordable outdoor gear. And over the years, REI has advocated very strongly for preserving the outdoors, for bringing education to historically minoritized groups who haven't had access to the outdoors. And we love all those things that REI stands for, but we are also concerned that some of that original those original goals and that kind of ethos is eroding. And we wanted to make sure that we advocated as workers for preserving those values that are really important to us and that we think are a core part of REI.
What exactly are workers asking for? Fair scheduling, safety, pay, benefits, voice in decision making?
Those are exactly the things. So we're asking for, as a retail worker, it can be very precarious. You know, from week to week, your schedule changes. I rarely know my schedule more than 2 weeks out. Like we get our schedule Friday evening, that gives us the next 2 weeks, and it could be different every week. The difference isn't the main problem. It's when the hours fluctuate wildly that is a problem. So fair scheduling and minimum hours, that was a big thing that we were hoping for. Better safety conditions in our stores. Of course, pay, but I wouldn't say that pay was one of our number one considerations. And then benefits, healthcare, that sort of thing. And also, most importantly, a voice in the decision-making process.
Absolutely. So that's a great. So are you a full-time employee with REI?
I'm not. I'm a part-time employee. I typically work 3 to 4 days, but that does vary depending on the season. So that can drop down to maybe 12, 14 hours some weeks. And some weeks I get, like, we have our big sale coming up next week, and I'm working a full 5 days, 40 hours. So there's a lot of variation. And depending on where folks are in their lives, like I have the privilege of having a partner that has a more stable 9 to 5. And so when hours fluctuate a little bit, it doesn't hurt me as much. But there are many of my coworkers who really rely on those checks, who are paying rent and surviving off the pay that they make as part-time employees at REI. And it really hurts them when they jump down from 4 days a week to 1 day or 1.5 shifts without any real advance notice.
Yeah, I could see how that would be really challenging. When I worked there, I found it really hard to take home a paycheck because I spent all my money on gear. That was the hardest thing for me, was to save anything at all, because that pro deal really gets you. But it was challenging. I do remember that with the scheduling, seeing when it would come out. And some weeks you have way more hours and other weeks you don't have hardly any. And then it can be hard to adjust your other commitments in life. And that was when I was like, I think 18 and 19 years old. This is a long time ago. So 20 years ago for me, which is wild. But it was challenging for sure, the scheduling, and the pay was also really challenging at minimum wage. And I think our minimum wage is still the same that it was then 20 years ago, which is also wild and problematic.
Gosh.
Yeah. So, have you had any wins, or how, do you have any stories from the floor about wins, challenges, risks taken?
So one thing one way to look at unions is that it's not just about getting that legal document at the end of the process of a contract. It's also just the process of getting together with your workers and realizing, even if the legal system is slow, and even if this whole process for getting an actual contract out of it is slow, we can right now get together ourselves and advocate for ourselves. So, for example, very close, actually, before we had our election, we had a couple of employees who were trying to transfer out of the store, and they were getting a hard time from management, and there wasn't a very good reason for them to get a hard time from management. And we discussed this amongst ourselves, and we decided this is really unfair, and there's no reason these employees should be punished. We suspect that part of it was to do with the fact that we had just filed for an election, and so perhaps there was some bad blood there, which would. But it was very frustrating for those employees to have it taken out on them. So a bunch of us walked into the store before it opened one day, and we delivered a letter to the managers and said, this is really not right what you're doing. We support these employees, and we want you to respect their wishes. There's no good reason for you to deny these. There was no internal REI policy that prevented these transfers. And so we advocated for ourselves, and eventually some of those folks were able to get transferred out smoothly. And that was an example of where before we even had an actual union on paper, we just got together and we advocated for ourselves. And it was a really good illustration of how you can achieve things by combining your power and advocating for yourselves.
That's a really great example. So what has management, you touched a little bit about, you touched on this a little bit, but what has management's response been like?
I would say probably not optimal, but I think it might be more helpful to talk about the bigger picture and how REI's leadership at the top level has responded, because sometimes, just to give folks the benefit of the doubt, they are getting instructions from leadership, and so the middle management, the folks who are actually managing our store, they may not have the final say. Of course, there are better and worse ways to go about implementing policies, even when they're handed down from the top. But I think our main obstacles so far have been coming down from the board and upper management at REI, and so they haven't really made it very easy for us to move forward with the process of negotiating for a contract. We did also experience a lot of pushback in the days leading up to the election. We had several folks come in and try to talk us out of unionizing, and as far as the National Labor Relations Board goes, though that's not that's not an acceptable way to handle an election. And so there were definitely some gray areas where we were pretty upset by the way management was handling the whole process.
Can you sorry, keep going. Sorry.
No, please.
I was going to just jump in. You talk about the election. Can you just explain a little bit more what that means?
Absolutely. So when you have, I want to say it's 30% of employees, you do what's called signing out a card, filling out a card, where you say, we want to have an election. This is not a guarantee that you'll have a union. It's just to say we want the opportunity to choose for ourselves whether or not we want to be represented by an election. So it doesn't have to be a majority, it just has to be a sizable minority of the employees who say, will you please give us, so we're asking the National Labor Relations Board, will you come and hold an election for us? And now at this point, a company can just say, okay, it looks like enough of you actually want a union, so we could recognize a union. We don't need to have an election. And some companies that are less anti-union have done this. It's not necessary to go through the whole process of the union, but I do see some merit in saying, okay, we are not sure where all our employees stand, so let's give them a chance to vote, and let's see how the vote shakes out. That would also be a reasonable response. So, and what REI did was they said, yes, we want everyone to get the opportunity to choose, and so we did go ahead and have the election. So you have 4 to 6 weeks before the actual election happens. And during that time, REI is allowed to tell you what they would like, but they are not allowed to intimidate you into voting one way or another. They are not allowed to say, well, if you unionize, we're going to take these things away, or your managers won't be able to help you, or things like that. That would not be the right thing to do. And as you might guess, some of those things actually did happen, and we were quite disappointed with that. But so you have that period that's leading up to the election, and then you have the election day itself. An official from the National Labor Relations Board will come in, and they'll be there for a designated period of time. You're allowed to, like, workers are given a couple minutes to go cast their ballot, and then at the end of it, it's tabulated. And the way the election is decided is, out of the employees that do vote, you have to have 50% plus one vote in favor of unionizing in order for the election to successfully decide on representation by a union.
So have you had this election yet? Did you say?
Yes.
Okay.
We had our election in May of, it was 2 years ago, of May of 23. We're just coming up on 2 years to the day on at the end of this month.
And that was for your store, correct?
That's just for our store. So
just for your store.
Correct. So most workplaces, you have to do it location by location. So the very first REI location that unionized, Si-Hua in Manhattan, New York, they unionized in 2021. And then there were several others. We were somewhere in the middle. And now we're up to 11 stores across the country. That's out of approximately 200 REIs.
Okay, so 11 out of 200. And how has it been received amongst the workers in your store and then other stores that aren't unionized?
It's hard for me to say how it is for folks in other stores that aren't unionized. This is the only store that I've had the chance to work at. Our store was, for the most part, very happy. To be fair, there were a couple of folks who were not very thrilled about being represented by a union, and we totally respect that. Their vote is very valid. We just that's not how the outcome ultimately came through. So there were some folks who were not very happy about about being represented by a union. You might say, well, some of that might have been because of the way REI presented the unionization process to them. And so we think there was a little bit of misinformation involved in that as well. But of course, everyone is entitled to their position. And if it's a well-informed no, we totally want to respect that. And not everyone wants to get involved, which is fine.
Absolutely. So how are the contract negotiations then going with, like, the upper management? And what is kind of the status of that? So
the way REI has decided it's going to work is that every single location meets for its own contract negotiations. Okay. We never interact with anyone actually from REI. So we see their legal firm. It's a legal firm called Morgan, Lewis and Bockius. They represent other large firms like Amazon and Trader Joe's. They've represented Elon Musk in the past and the president. They are typically regarded as one of the largest anti-union firms in the country. And so by choosing this firm to represent them, REI was again sending a message. They weren't really interested in reaching a productive outcome, having conversations that led somewhere. The message we got was they're trying to stall us out for as long as possible. And that definitely was reflected in our bargaining session. So our location, we've been unionized for just under 2 years. We have had 26 separate meetings, and that's full days of negotiations, in talks with these lawyers. And we have gotten so the way the process works is we'll have these proposals, and each side will make a proposal, and then you'll counter with a different proposal. Each side is usually starting from a pretty extreme position and we're trying to move to like a consensus, a common ground. So far, our store, we've gotten to, I think, 6. They're called tentative agreements. So that's a proposal where we say, okay, we will decide that we're both agreed that for like this contract, for example, is going to last 3 years or something like that, right? It's a small piece of like contract verbiage that is where we're both agreed and we've signed off on it. So we've made very few substantive agreements like that. We've tossed a lot of them back and forth, but the impression we get with the way REI has been responding to our proposals is that they're not interested in reaching a contract quickly. They're trying to delay out as long as possible.
So do you have a lawyer then that works for the union that's representing you? Yes. Okay. So It's like the legal teams and the workers and then their legal team. But it seems to me that like by the time they spent all that money on legal fees, they could just do a couple of the things. I mean, I don't know the numbers. Like I'd have to run them. But I know that lawyers, and especially a big law firm that has worked for Elon Musk and Amazon, like they can't be cheap, right?
That's a very good point. We feel similarly frustrated about for the same reasons, because we're sitting across the table. So there's usually me and 4 or 5 of my coworkers, and then our lawyer from the union. We are just interacting with this law firm. No one from REI shows up. These folks probably make 50, 60, 70 times what we make. And their job, they're not in touch with everyday life in a retail store. Perhaps some of them have never worked retail at all. And so their job is to like stall and make things as slow and tedious for us as possible. And it feels bad because like we're not getting to talk to REI execs themselves or even managers from our own stores. And then there are these folks who are making so much more than we are. REI is spending so many resources on them, and REI is doing this for every single store. So this is just one store. We've had 26 days, wow. 2 to 3 lawyers from their side flying across the country to meet with us, and then times 10 or 11, and to varying degrees. So the store in Soho, they've been unionized for more than 3 years. They've been at it for even longer than we have. And so you're right. Like there are a lot of resources that REI is pouring into this process that aren't really helping workers at all.
Yeah, that part just seems a little bit funny to me, because you would think that they would want their management and their team like coming to the table too, because it's honestly, I think that it could become a win-win if you're spending that much time negotiating. Like it seems like you could really do some great things to improve the store and the conditions and like just make employees really stoked. So that part is really interesting. But in terms of moving the needle, what kind of public support or pressure, like how can we support you? Because that's a huge amount of extra work too. Like I'm assuming you're not paid for those 26 days that you're spending inside those rooms negotiating. And so how can we support you as not REI employees?
We are paid for some of it. The union is funding us. We don't get paid for all the work we do, nor are we expecting it. But when we miss work for these negotiation days, the union pays us at our basic rate. This is without us paying anything into the union. We're not paying dues. We haven't signed a contract. They're just funding our legal fees and our wages for those days where we miss work. So that actually makes it a little bit more reasonable for us to show up to the table. I know that there have been unions in the past. For example, early in the days of the Starbucks union, a lot of folks were having to, on their wages that they made as baristas at Starbucks, fly out to meet with their law firms and take the hit of missing days at work. And I think that would be very, very difficult. And so we're very appreciative that we're getting some level of support to continue, especially because it's being dragged out for so long.
I really appreciate that you set the record straight on that. I think that's an important thing for transparency and just so audience knows how this stuff kind of works. So viewers, listeners. But I was just curious, like right now, I do think that unions are a lot more like workers' rights. We're hearing about it a lot more. And it's partly because I think we're seeing like more economic concentration with the dominance of Amazon and billionaires like Jeff Bezos who are controlling so much wealth. But yeah, I guess public support pressure, like how do we change the political will so that working class people can have the things they need to not just survive, but to be able to thrive in our society and economy?
Absolutely. And so in general, I think showing up for union actions is a way that people can help regardless of the campaign, writing to your representatives and in support of them making sure that working people are taken care of, that scheduling, wages, benefits, OSHA regulations, those are all maintained or improved. In our specific case for REI, REI does care what its members think. And we saw even recently, REI decided early in the year to support this administration's nomination for Secretary of the Interior. And that didn't seem to land very well with members. A lot of people were really outraged. And we saw across REI's social media, people were commenting and saying, how could you support someone like this? And so regardless of how someone might feel about that, it was very clear, like members of REI had strong feelings about this and they thought REI messed up. And eventually REI did release an apology saying, we shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have supported this candidate. We do in fact care about public lands. And we don't think it's a good thing that there are plans to privatize public lands. And so that was a big step. And we're actually, it made us a little bit hopeful. There's been a change in the CEO as well. We're hopeful that REI will start to listen to its members more. And so for the general public and folks who are even slightly following what REI is doing, they do care about what their members think. Write to them. We're currently running a campaign where we're asking people to write into the CEO. You can find that at our website, ourrei.com, ourrei.com, and making it clear that, commenting on social media, that you're not thrilled about what REI is doing.
Yeah, I just wanted to double down on the call to action for listeners to go to ourrei.com because you have a great form here with great instructions on kind of the things that we're talking about and the anti-union, the overall trajectory as the co-op, the values. And that's a great resource for folks to learn more about the movement and to support the work that you're doing. So I really appreciate you taking us through this rundown. And I wanted to do a quick rapid fire, if we could, about REI stuff. So, and outdoor stuff. So we'll kick that off. So what is your favorite piece of gear or a favorite piece of gear? I know for me,
I have a boring answer and I have a fun answer. So the kind of fancy piece of gear that I like, I have a Nemo Dragonfly backpacking tent. It's kind of lightweight. It's really roomy, very nifty. I love it, but I don't use it every day. I do, however, use my Injinji socks every day. They're or any kind of toe socks. I use Injinji because that's one of the brands that we carry at REI. I recently started wearing them for just everyday, work and walking and running, and I fell in love with them. And now that's all I wear. They feel super weird at first. They even make you think about the fact that you have toes all the time, but then you get used to them. And then when you wear regular socks, they feel weird.
Second that, especially for my longer runs or hikes. They are so good at preventing blisters, especially between the toes. And I think who first turned me on to, like, I had had a little exposure to them, but then I was on a trip. I got to do a trip a few years ago with the ultra running legend, Courtney DeWalter, and she was wearing them. So I was like, if she wears them and she runs 100 miles super fast, I got to wear them too. So,
Amazing.
and I can double down on that. Okay. So next question is best thing about working at REI.
It really is the culture. So I think that mostly that is like the coworkers and the customers or the members, because it really is a pretty warm atmosphere for the most part. Like I think better than standard retail. Customers are really quite nice usually. Coworkers are also great. Everyone's really enthusiastic about the outdoors and like excited. And so and it's a place where people come. It's kind of like a toy store for people who are outdoorsy, right? It's usually people come when they've got good like fun plans coming up. And so just getting to hear people's like adventures, building relationship with repeat customers where they'll come back and tell you like, oh, thanks for the recommendation for that backpack. I had a really good time. That is like one of the highlights of working at REI.
Yeah, you really are like making people's dreams come true. Like when I think about the places like when I'm going to REI, it's like often before a big expedition to like get the last minute knickknacks and things. Not knickknacks. I mean, the little things make a camping setup. It's like the details and things. And so that's really cool that you can be a part of that. What is the most frustrating thing about working at REI?
I don't know that anything like immediately comes to mind. I think what's difficult is like we genuinely do care about outfitting people well, and sometimes when it's busy or when we don't have enough people available, it can be difficult to give everyone all the attention they need. And sometimes, like there's several folks who have needs here where they could benefit from a detailed thorough conversation, but sometimes we just don't have the resources to give that to them. And so that's always a bummer because we'd love to help everyone out and have, that in-depth conversation with them. It's rewarding, but also it's like part of doing the job. And so sometimes we just can't do that. And it's a real bummer. I think that's just, to an extent, that's just part of retail. Like sometimes you get mobbed and there's like a lot of people and there's nothing you can do about it. But I think some of it could be tied back into like, okay, can we like make sure that there are adequate staffing levels on the floor so that like when members come in looking for the experience that they're used to getting at REI, we can still continue to deliver on that for them.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's also a challenging time with REI, with just I mean, I know from my work in the outdoor industry that it was like COVID shut everything down, supply chains were disrupted, we couldn't keep things in stock. And then I feel like outdoor brands kind of overproduced because then the demand dropped off as soon as they caught up. So I think it is a challenging retail environment, and especially with the prevalence of e-commerce and how many people are going to the devil Amazon to buy stuff. Sorry, but I just try as much as I can not to shop on Amazon these days. And I think that when you need a store and you need a specialist, like it's you can't replace it. It's irreplaceable.
Right.
Like having a real person or a place you can go try on something or where you can get those last minute items. But it's challenging now with e-commerce. And so I could see that there's probably some growing pains with staffing and with just the whole nature of, and now with tariffs, oh my gosh,
yes.
What another wrench. Like we didn't even talk about that, but that's another conversation. That's a whole nother day. Like that has already affected my business immensely. Like all the brands I work with, I think it's going to have a huge impact on a bigger business like REI and on tons of small businesses and even like mid-sized businesses in the outdoor space. Like it's going to have a big impact. And unfortunately, things are going to get more expensive. And anyway, so that's
That's a good point though. Like I don't want to come across as us being unrealistic about the limitations and the constraints that REI is facing as a retail entity. We're not trying to be unrealistic and ask REI to pay everyone, a couple $100 an hour and to staff everyone 40 hours a week. We understand there are constraints and we understand there's going to be some difficult conversations that we have to have in moving forward with a contract. We just wish that REI would actually like commit to having those conversations with us rather than stalling and making just things drag out as much as possible, because we understand like we're going to have to make some difficult trade-offs. That's just the environment we're living in. And so that's, when we get a contract, no one is going to get everything that they want. REI is not going to have a contract that looks perfect to them, and we're not going to have a contract that looks perfect to us. But that's the nature of negotiation and compromise. And so we would love to get an opportunity to do that, and to really to get a better sense for the constraints that REI is also experiencing. But at the same time, to make clear to them, like, these are the constraints we're also facing. Like, we have rent to make, we have childcare and healthcare needs, and those also don't go away just because the retail environment is tough. So we want to find a way where, we can, like, REI can continue to thrive, but also the workers can continue to thrive.
Absolutely. And I think that probably some of the people that might be listening thinking like, oh, unionization, like it's just going to bankrupt the company. I think that there's a lot of false narratives and misinformation out there about unions. And I think that UPS and Teamsters is a prime example of a really great union relationship. Like I love the UPS people that come to my house. Like you can tell that they're like happy and healthy and like they're paid a fair wage. And like, it just, the vibes with UPS are good. I always feel like whenever I have an interaction with our local UPS delivery driver. And I think that's a reflection of the great work that Teamsters have done with UPS over the years. And so these relationships do not have to be antagonistic. Like there are plenty of great examples out there of relationships where the negotiations have gone well. And even like UPS on their website brags about their relationship with the Teamsters and how it helps people build their dream careers. And I think that REI, like you don't want it just to be a place where you want it to be a career really for people,
yes.
Instead of just a gig. And I think that is what the effort you're trying, I see that as like a great outcome that could come of this.
Absolutely. And I don't know how it was when you were working at REI, but we, based on talking to coworkers who've worked for, 10, 15 years at REI, it used to have a slightly different culture where it was a place where you could make a career out of it, and they would do their best to hang on to employees, to keep that expertise in-house, and to make sure that employees were like healthy and well cared for, so that they could in turn provide a good service to the customers. And sadly, we have seen in the past few years, like there's been a shift that we're getting in more of this kind of big box retail culture, both in terms of the kinds of folks that they're bringing on to upper management, and also the kinds of policies that we're seeing on the ground. Like just a year and a half ago, REI laid off 275 of its most experienced employees, and replaced all those roles with part-time or temporary workers who had much less training, definitely much less than the decades and decades of experience that we lost with those layoffs. And so, I mean, yes, the times are hard, but there are right ways to do things, and there are ways of doing things that are really not so great. And so this ties back into what we've been talking about, how REI is, we're afraid that REI is losing its roots of what made it so good, and turning its back on workers, which have been an integral part of the co-op for so long.
Yeah, and I would just think that there's got to be a way to find a win-win, to make some sort of agreement so people can keep their dream jobs in the outdoor industry, and that they can grow with the company. And like, I don't know, it just seems like some creative brainstorming rather than these negotiations with a known anti-union legal firm. I just think that would lead to a better outcome personally. But I haven't been in these conversations, but thank you for showing up. What gives you hope?
It really is the degree of support that we've received so far. So both at a store level, where we see when we had a strike, whenever we have rallies and actions, we see so many members showing up for us, people from the community, people from other unions locally. And then even like on a day-to-day basis, we'll see folks come in and look at my union pin and say, hey, I support you guys. We're gunning for you. We hope that you're able to keep your jobs and that REI improves your conditions. And that is always really nice to hear, that people care, that they do appreciate those values that REI used to have and maybe still has a little bit, but is struggling to hold on to. That's very encouraging. And that also speaks to the kind of clientele that REI has. People like REI doesn't always have the cheapest prices. It's not Amazon, right? And people could easily go on Amazon and buy stuff for less money. They might get a different quality of goods, but there are different ways to approach outdoor recreational pursuits. No judgment, because sometimes REI does sell slightly more expensive things, and sometimes the things on Amazon are cheaper. But the kind of folks that we get in, they don't mind the fact that they're paying a little extra because they expect that REI is treating its workers better. REI is standing up for conservation efforts, for efforts to include or to improve education about outdoor spaces. And so seeing members care about those kinds of things is great. And also it definitely speaks to the kind of customer base that REI has, that they feel this way.
That's so cool to hear. You think co-op, union, they go hand in hand, right? It seems to me that they make a nice pairing. So,
Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about the ourrei.com, and I'm going to put that link in the show notes. So definitely check that out as a resource. But how else can we keep in touch and follow the work that you're doing?
So we have socials. We have Instagram, and Facebook, and TikTok. We post regular updates with any news. Our most recent big update has been this campaign so REI just held a board election, and we submitted 2 candidates with long records of working in conservation, and REI didn't field either of those candidates. And so after we saw the ballot, it was more of the same, re-electing incumbents. We had an initiative to vote no on all these candidates, and we were successful. We got over 100,000 REI members to click on the site, and we think it's probably one of the largest elections that REI has had for the board, and all 3 of the candidates that REI fielded were voted down. And so, wow. So I'm sidetracking, but the point is, so we posted, this is one of our most recent updates that you will see on our socials.
Great. What is the handle?
It is REI Union and Instagram.com.
Perfect. I'll link it in the show notes so that people can follow the Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And is there anything else that I missed?
I don't think so. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this.
Yes, thank you so much. If you're ever in the Utah, in Salt Lake City, Park City area, please hit me up. It would be my pleasure to show you around, to take you on a hike here. And I will do the same if I come your way to Raleigh, Durham area.
By all means, please do. Yeah.
I'd love to keep in touch. Thank you so much for your hard work and leadership, for taking the time to chat with me. And it really comes down to our love of the REI co-op. And we just want the co-op to live up to the values that taught us. So Indeed. We'll keep going and we'll keep in touch. Thank you so much.